Central Partnership Energy Efficiency as a resource. And we are a 501c3 organization whose mission is to accelerate the adoption of energy efficient products and services in Texas and Oklahoma. We do this through partnerships and with stakeholders, providing science-based resources and trainings for membership and partners, promoting policies that advance energy efficiency technology and research, as well as other innovations. Our vision as an organization is to be positioned as a regional leader in the education and promotion of energy efficient building systems and distributed energy resources that strengthen local economies, improve health, quality of life, and protect the environment. So SPEER is one of 6 regional energy efficiency organizations designated by the Department of Energy. We call ourselves the RIOs. We work together to accelerate the adoption of advanced building systems and energy efficient products and services throughout the nation. We collaboratively work to strengthen local economies and improve health and quality of life, as well as improve the environment. We work very closely together in areas of building codes, advancing more efficient, sustainable, resilient buildings, as well as working with our local governments to provide education and resources as needed. So today you're joining us for a panel discussion on resilience, reliability, utilities, and policy, and how those all play together. Here's kind of a list of things as to why we put this together. We had planned on having an in-person conference last week and had opted, due to the current environment, to cancel that conference. And this was one of our panel discussions that we felt was incredibly timely given what is happening right now at the Texas Public Utilities Commission and ERCOT. So I myself worked very closely with Rachel Gold from ACEEE to bring in our speakers today, who will cover some of these questions and talk about how we look at expanding energy efficiency here in Texas. So I will hand it over to Rachel to introduce our panel, and let's get started. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and welcome everyone. It's great to be with you all today and to talk about this really crucial and really critical topic. So thank you all for taking the time to join us. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I'm gonna just share my screen. Give me one moment, please, and make sure that we can all see that. Wonderful. Are you all seeing the right screen?
It's good.
Wonderful. So today we are gathered to talk about resilience, reliability, utilities, and policy. And we have some subtitles that are not necessary. All right, we'll stop that. Very distracting to see your own words. And I'm really looking forward to talking with 3 fantastic speakers with really different perspectives on energy efficiency and demand flexibility, and how these tools can be resources to support resilience and reliability. So if you don't know ACEEE, we are a national 501c3 that works to advance energy efficient policies, programs, technologies, investments, and behaviors. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work with each of the RIOs, including SPEER. And what I wanted to do today is tee up this topic with a little bit of context from some work that we did at the beginning of the year on winter peaks that really came to a head and was illustrated why this topic is so important back in February. And you'll hear more from Allison on the specific context of that winter storm. But I just wanted to tee up the conversation by sharing a little bit of a national perspective on energy efficiency, demand side measures, and winter peaks. And then we can dive into our Texas specific panel. So nationally, we know that winter peaking utilities are on the rise, and or utilities that are going to face winter constraints. So even if they're not necessarily peaking in the winter, we're increasingly seeing a focus on making sure that we have the appropriate reliability year round and not just in those traditional summer peaks that most regions of the country were used to. This is an image from the Nrel Electrification Future Study. And as you can see, their simulations of increased electrification are suggesting that many more regions are going to shift towards winter peaks over time. In particular, this shows the Northeast and Southeast having a lot of that transition. And I think it's important just to acknowledge that winter and summer peaks are not the same thing. It's not just peaking at a different time of year. They really look different on the grid. The characteristics are different. And that's because they're driven by different technologies. They're driven by different fuels. And when you take a look at this, you can see they actually occur at really different times of the day. The summer peak tends to run afternoon, early evening, generally looks like one peak. In contrast, a winter peak tends to be bimodal, and the top of that peak tends to be in the morning. It's also the case that not all winter peaks are created equal, and there are winter peaks that look very brief. It's just a couple of hours in the morning, and there are winter constraints that can be as long as a couple of weeks. And so there's really a lot of diversity in grid conditions associated with winter challenges that I think Texas illustrated quite keenly this year. This past year, we published a piece of work, which we're happy to share if folks are interested, called Demand Side Solutions to Winter Peaks and Constraints. And what that did is just took a look at, okay, if these winter peaks are coming, what's the role of the demand side? Should we just be solving this by building a lot of natural gas plants, or are there ways to use clean resources, particularly energy efficiency, demand flexibility, and batteries, to help to solve this problem, perhaps more cheaply? So this is sort of a list of the typical programs we see in those places of the country that are already winter peaking, your Pacific Northwest, up in Canada. And this is sort of a potpourri of measures, primarily across heating, some water heating, and there are different characteristics. We see opportunities in energy efficiency to change the load across the year, load shifting within a given day, as well as load shedding. So there's a lot of different technologies that can offer support to address winter peaks around the country. And this is sort of the potpourri of options that we see. Our research took a look at one region in particular, New England, which is projected to experience winter peaks with electrification. And we wanted to see, okay, what happens on a really dangerous polar vortex day in a highly electrified future. So we took a look at, projected out to 2040, what might that peak look like? And what might we be able to do with demand reduction? So if you take a quick look at these results, you can see the dotted line represents the original load on one of those polar vortex days that we modeled out. The red, yellow, and blue layers represent the space heating, electric vehicle, and water heating loads. And then the gray layer is all of the other loads. And we found that different packages of energy efficient measures, standard measures that are a part of lots of portfolios today, smart measures really focused on demand response, and deep measures that really get into the envelope can have a really profound impact on peak demand, potentially reducing peak load, those projected peak loads, by up to 34%. So really taking a bite out of that peak. So that's just kind of a picture of the opportunity in New England. Wouldn't look the same necessarily in Texas, but many of the characteristics of these technologies are similar. And so it offers a good roadmap or guide to how we might think about problem solving in other regions as well. And today we're going to hear from Tom about how a utility in the Southeast has thought about this kind of problem solving in their service territory. As you can see, the most effective demand side measures that we found were, by a large margin, those that help to reduce heating load. And we would imagine that that might be the case in Texas as well, where we'll hear from some of our speakers today, increased heating load was really a challenge this past winter. So we found that residential weatherization, shown here in the light blue, was the biggest driver of lowered peak in our modeling, and improved cold climate air source heat pump performance. So using the best available cold climate heat pumps as opposed to sort of run-of-the-mill heat pumps could also have a really big impact. That's what's shown there in red on peak. There's also lots of other measures that could have a role to play, but I think it's important to focus where where the peak is, and that's really in the heating space. So starting to think about buildings and their heating loads and their cooling loads, especially in a place like Texas where you're going to have heating and cooling challenges, is really crucial. So that's a drive-by of a very long report, and I hope you'll take the time to take a look, and if you have questions about it, feel free to get in touch. I can connect you with the authors. Today, I'm really excited to introduce three fantastic speakers. I'll start with Allison Silverstein, who I've known for many years and who works and lectures for government and private clients on a whole range of issues, from transmission and distribution to energy efficiency to renewables. She's written some of your top and most famous papers in the energy space. And most importantly to me, Allison is a member of ACEEE's board and a real expert on the Texas grid. So she's going to be able to give us some context about the recent reliability challenges and share a little bit about a report that she wrote with former commissioners from the Public Utilities Commission of Texas on how we can avoid what recently happened in Texas. Next up will be Sneha Ayagari, and Sneha is a senior associate on RMI's carbon-free buildings practice. She leverages her background there in civil and environmental engineering to advocate for policies and technologies that contribute to a more just and sustainable built environment. That is a good mission statement. I love that. She is a part of the team that is launching the Resilient Texas Communities work. So Sneha is going to give us a perspective on the role of communities and local governments in helping to advance resilience. And then last but very much not least is Tom Hines, who's an energy efficiency expert with over 20 years of experience in demand side management, program design, implementation, evaluation. Soup to nuts, he's got it. And he in particular has a lot of great experience with Arizona Public Service. Today, he's going to share about some of the work he did with the Southeast utility on their recent winter peak study, and can share some insights about the role of utilities in helping to address resilience and reliability. So we're going to hear from the grid perspective, we're going to hear from the buildings and local government perspective, and we're going to hear from the utility perspective today. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to pass it over to Allison.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for giving me my own transmission tower. I've never had one before, so that's exciting. And now I am working on getting all of the, okay, can everybody see that?
Looks good.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you so much to everybody for inviting me to join you today, and let's get started. My job is to tell you what happened with Winter Storm Uri. So I'm going to get this this little thumbnail video out of my way and tell you that this event began on February 11 and sub-freezing temperatures continued through February 18. For most of us here in Texas, and I saw several Texas colleagues and associates on the participant list, as you all know, most of us didn't realize that the grid was going to go down. We started getting cold earlier, but starting on February 14th, a series of power plants of every possible kind here in Texas began failing under the cold weather at about one. So ERCOT started cutting load and ultimately cut 20.5 gig of load. That's close to a third of everything that was still online, over a third of what was online. So they started cutting load around midnight on February 15. Over 4 million customer accounts were out of power. That equals 69% of all Texans. And most of them were out of power for an average of 42 hours. When I say out of service, that means straight by the clock. There was no capability to rotate outages because there were so many, which is usually how a utility wants to manage a smaller shortfall of demand relative to supply, is you put one circuit out of power for an hour and then you rotate to another circuit. We could not do that here inside ERCOT because the individual utilities have so many, quote, critical facilities identified on their circuits that almost, I think 90% of a couple of the utilities had, sorry, I said that wrong. Many of the utilities have 90% of their circuits with one or more critical customers. So there was nobody left to cut or nobody to rotate to. Once you were out of power, you were out of power. until power plants and gas supply could be unfrozen, and we could get enough gas to a lot of those gas plants, get coal frozen in coal piles, broken up and fed into boilers, etc. Some of the consequences of this: half of Texans lost access to running water or drinkable water. Over half had difficulty obtaining food, groceries, internet service, or bottled water because so many of the facilities were down. And I should mention that roads were very iced over and impassable starting around the 12th. So it made it even harder for people to do things like go shopping. One of the things, because Texas has so many poorly insulated or uninsulated homes, and a lot of the water pipes inside our houses are close to these uninsulated walls. So close to a third of the homes in Texas were, the pipes were frozen and then broken because of the ice in the pipes. So that to add insult to injury, you're sitting in the dark with no drinkable water, and then your house starts breaking and flooding things when the melt started on the 14th and 15th. Harris County, Houston is one of our biggest cities in Texas and in the nation, and 91% of the Houston and Harris County residents were out of power. Disproportionate harm to the lowest income Texans because of the lack of things that you have due to low income, including no ability to escape to somewhere that had power, no ability to buy food in advance. Over 200 people died, not all of them from electricity failure, but many of them froze or got carbon monoxide poisoning. And there were billions of dollars in damages across the economy of here inside ERCOT, but a lot of those damages were to humans and houses and possessions rather than not. This doesn't count misery, by the way, which is a whole separate thing that's hard to figure out how to monetize. I worked with 5 past PUC commissioners to organize in response to this, we issued a set of recommendations following Winter Storm Uri and the legislative session and the orgy of recriminations that followed Winter Storm Uri, and who was to blame and who should have done what and who didn't do what. Some of the recommendations that we offered, and we tried to be, this was a bipartisan group of commissioners with long experience in the industry and limited responsibility for some of the measures that people were blaming to be your fault, his fault, etc. We organized our recommendations as a function of what were some of the key problems that caused this and how do we address them. One of the most important problems was the electricity demand skyrocketed 20% over forecast because both Texas summer and winter electric peak demand are weather driven, so that if it gets super cold, heating requirements are going to blast up the electricity demand. And when it gets very hot, again, air conditioning is going to drive up demand. We can address both of those by improving building energy efficiency with updated and automatically routinely updated building codes. We should be raising utility efficiency requirements and targeting them to both annual energy and peak reductions with a massive increase in energy efficiency program funding. When I say utility, for those of you who are not from around here, we have transmission and distribution utilities that manage the energy efficiency program delivery, but it is retail electric providers that are separate from the transmission and distribution utility that actually have the direct customer relationship in terms of, and you can shop for your retail electric provider. We particularly recommended, as a matter of equity and practicality, increasing energy efficiency retrofits for low income and multifamily housing. If you're on this call, you are well aware that low income and multifamily housing are the customers who have the least ability and access to funds to do energy efficiency retrofits. And we recommend that there be at least 100,000 of these done per year. I understand that this is a stretch goal, but that's not the point. And we strongly recommend increasing demand response for energy use. We've also recommended improving distribution utilities capabilities and with measures that also enhance customer resilience. And these measures for here include modifying and better segmentation and of transmission and distribution utility circuits so that we can enable more granular outage rotation, requiring large commercial and industrial customers to be able to reduce load remotely rather than forcing residential customers to take it on the chops, and requiring all critical facilities to have 2 days of backup power. If you didn't have to protect so many critical facilities on circuits, you wouldn't have to have so many customers out of service. Looking more broadly beyond just Texas, and you should know that here in Texas, jingoism is a pretty big thing, and it's hard to imagine that there are broader goals than just what's good for Texas, but we're going to stretch here. The bigger threats beyond Texas are climate change, of course, and the fact that historical or normal weather conditions that we've designed this grid for, and frankly, energy efficiency programs for, these are not accurate guides for current and future conditions. As some of you are tired of hearing me say, we designed this grid for Ozzie and Harriet weather, and we are now facing Mad Max. Consistent with that, the utility industry as a whole has treated extreme weather as high impact, low frequency events. But the reality is that extreme weather conditions overall are now high impact, medium frequency, and we need to change our planning and our risk calculus accordingly. As you know, current grid assets do not perform well under extreme weather conditions. They are not tough enough to withstand some of those bad conditions. They have lower performance capability under more extreme particular heat conditions. And the utility industry at present, unless the Biden administration gets a whole lot of money and in the budget and regulators in states become more generous and forward-looking, utilities have a very limited ability to replace or upgrade their asset base to meet these challenges face on. And there are continuing risks for a variety of other threats beyond extreme weather, including fuel availability, cybersecurity, and the like. Resource adequacy is changing markedly with extreme weather and electrification and the changing composition of the supply side mix of generation and storage. And it's going to be much harder to grow and operate the grid supply side as the weather gets worse and supply finds new ways to fail. So the punchline in my mind, and clearly in those of many of you on this call, is that we have to fix demand as well as supply. Looking long term, we need energy efficiency that's permanently reducing peak load. This will make complex grid systems significantly easier to operate and less risky. And we will get demand flexibility measures that enhance grid operational reliability and give operators much more tools for integrating renewable generation and handling sudden contingencies like transmission or generation loss. One of the things that I appreciate most about energy efficiency and demand response is they serve customers and communities every single day, 24/7, 365, under multiple threat conditions. And they are less expensive and more dependable than every other energy resource out there, even though they're a little harder to organize. Equally important for the long term, these resources can buy us time by cutting carbon while we figure out how to adapt to climate change and operate the newly challenging grid with high renewables. But those are, so what I've tried to do here is lay a foundation so that Sneha and Tom can now tell you why everything that they're doing matters and help us learn. Thank you. Sneha.
Thank you so much, Allison. Sneha, we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts as well. And Allison, thanks for teeing things up and giving us the context for what happened and how we can think about the role of the demand side. Sneha?
Great. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's showing in slide sorter mode. There you are.
There we go. Is it all good now? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Allison, for that wonderful introduction. It's really an honor to be here with everybody today. My name is Sneha Agadi, and I'm a senior associate in the carbon-free buildings team. I also grew up and lived in Texas for most of my life in the Dallas-Fort Worth area metroplex. So both the personal experience of the storm and the context here is really important to me as well personally, as to most people on the call, I'm sure. And I want to acknowledge the work of many of my colleagues for their contributions to the slides, research, and that I'll be sharing today. So as many of you know, Texas grid is only one vulnerability of many. Texas is ranked first in the country in terms of both variety and frequency of natural disasters. This particularly has equity implications, as Allison mentioned. Land use patterns also contribute to communities being vulnerable to flooding and heat islands, in addition to extreme weather events. And disaster relief funding has historically flowed to wealthier communities, residents. And so local governments are on the front lines of crisis for this response and are best positioned both to understand and represent the needs of communities in partnership with community organizations. So first I'll open up by sharing some work that RMI is undertaking, and there's people who are participating in the program on the call as well, so it's great to see you here. So RMI will be providing technical assistance and facilitated peer learning to help local governments implement a range of measures, including buildings, transportation, and community resilience hubs. We're also working with a broader coalition of cities on power sector reform and helping doing some analysis to help equip that coalition. RMI is also committed to ensuring that vulnerable and disadvantaged communities are central to this work as well. And we'll be working with cities on developing those programs further. And today I'll be focusing on opportunities in the building sector. So as Allison teed up very nicely, the winter storm, there was an increase in demand for mostly inefficient electric resistance, and this was a major driver of the crisis. There's an estimated 35 gigawatts of weather sensitive peak load in February 15th of this year. And to put this in perspective, this is almost twice the maximum load shed by grid operators and more than the entire generation supply failures. And we know this from extrapolating from ERCOT's data. So ERCOT found a little under 30 gigawatts of weather sensitive peak load, comparing a 15-degree Dallas day in January of 2018 with at the same time as a warmer day 2 months later, and extrapolating based on temperature conditions and population growth, we arrived at this. And this illustrates the need for cities and policymakers to emphasize ways to make buildings more resilient. There's a great opportunity in Texas for resilience upgrades given the characteristics of its building stock. So Texas ranks first in new construction rates in the US. More than 2/3 of Texas homes were built before the advent of state energy codes in 2001, and 37% of single-family homes in Texas have no wall insulation, which also leads to water issues, as Allison was mentioning. And then since 2010, there's been a lot of construction of electric heat, particularly inefficient electric resistance, and switching to heat pumps or more efficient HVAC systems can help reduce energy bills and then also strain on the grid. And as you know, that in addition to resilience, there are many other benefits, as Rachel's presentation touched on as well, including improved health, decarbonization, and economic development. So on the national scale, so in Texas, air pollution from the use of fossil fuels in homes leads to leads to over 300 premature deaths per year and almost $3.5 billion in health impact costs, according to a study by Harvard. And recently, research from MIT is showing that building sectors contribute to the largest share of premature deaths associated with air pollution compared to other sectors. Building emissions are also a leading cause of climate change. Won't come as a surprise to any of you on this call. And resilient buildings can reduce pressure on the grid during peak hours through improvements in each of these categories. Another critical consideration is the concept of energy burden, which is the amount of money a household spends on energy divided by the household income. And for higher income residents, the percentage is around 2%, and it's almost 20% for families in the lowest median income bracket. So TEPRI ran a survey in mid-October of 2020 to find out how the pandemic was affecting energy burdens, especially for communities of color, and found that almost half of respondents who identified as Hispanic in their survey of low-income customers, and 40% who identified as Black were struggling to pay their electricity bills. And according to EERS, nationwide, bringing low-income housing stock up to efficiency levels of an average U.S. home would eliminate 42% and 68% of energy burden for Black and Latino communities, respectively. And energy burdens also have resilience implications. Grid operators intentionally avoided blacking out circuits that were shared with hospitals, fire, police services, and many of these also were in wealthier, predominantly white areas. And so it's possible that in non-white communities and households and also lower income communities lost power for much longer than others. Weatherization can also impact how long people, especially elders, stay safe in their homes, especially in extreme weather events. This is especially important for vulnerable groups such as senior citizens and young children, because they can be at a higher risk for symptoms such as pneumonia, also hypothermia. And I did some analysis in early 2020 of a modeled outage in Minnesota, and was showing how different, with higher levels of insulation, the buildings were able to maintain higher levels of safety for longer. And we also saw this play out in Texas this year. For example, two similar houses, one that was built around 1910. One was retrofitted and stayed above 50 degrees despite losing power. And the unimproved house reached below 40 degrees in the first 8 hours and was abandoned after it dropped below freezing. And from a grid perspective, weatherization alone, simple weatherization can reduce heating demand by 11 to 15%, according to EERS. And in addition to these benefits, there's also economic benefits of creating local jobs, construction, building trades, and there's many different sectors that can benefit from building decarbonization at scale. And of course, partnerships between cities and community organizations can help advance equitable policies. And here's a very partial list of many of the great folks that are doing good work in Texas. And I just wanted to end with a quote from our founder, Amy Lemon. And he said, most analyses ask only what went wrong with electric and gas supply and why. But that worthy question ignores the first half of the problem and the opportunity. Energy efficient buildings are the cheapest, deepest way to protect lives, build grid resilience, and strengthen our economy and security. And so with that, we have some additional resources here, and the slides will be sent afterwards. But thank you so much for having me, and I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Neha. And next up is Tom, who's going to share a little bit about the work that he did in the Southeast with a utility. So I think it'll be great to get a utility perspective after hearing a lot about what communities and buildings themselves need to do. Tom.
Yes, hey Rachel, just getting off of mute. So can everybody see this? And I'm going to go ahead and go into slide presentation mode. Are we good?
You're great.
Awesome, thanks. So yeah, thank you for having me today. My name is Tom Hines from Tierra, and I wanted to thank Sphere and folks from ACEEE for putting this presentation on today. I think it's really topical, and also thanks to the my other speakers here today. So today I'm going to focus on some work, as Rachel said, that Tierra did last year for Duke Energy Carolinas, and it was a winter peak targeted DSM study. And so while it's not Texas, I think it does provide some really good insights into how one of the, the largest utility in North America is thinking about this, and how their resource needs are changing in the Southeast, and their response to it, and as part of their IRP. So a little bit about the project. We did the project with support from Dunsky Energy Consulting and Proctor Engineering Group. There were really kind of three elements to the project. The first was to characterize winter peak loads. And I think what's interesting is that what we find is that, as Rachel pointed out, the planning for Duke in the past had always been around summer capacity, because in the past, Duke has always been a summer peaking utility. And so this 2020 IRP was the first IRP that, looking forward by 2041 or 2040 in the horizon of the IRP, there was a need for new capacity, and that need was driven by winter need. And so that is that sort of canary in the coal mine of more and more utilities. So Duke happens to be a utility that's going to 100% carbon free, which means they're bringing on a lot more solar. In the next slide, I'm going to show you how that's impacting IRP and how it really changes the planning horizon, the needs you're looking to serve, and the value and the focus of DSM. And so the first thing was really to try to characterize the winter peaks. What's driving winter peaks? What do they look like? What's the duration of them, et cetera, to really look at the next step, which was on the demand side. What are opportunities, and what might the potential for those opportunities look like? So it was a bit of a potential assessment study, but really looking across rates, EE, DSM, and being a little bit maybe more holistic than what we see in a typical energy efficiency market potential study. And then the last part that was really near and dear to my heart was going beyond a typical market potential study to actually look at a set of DSM programs that could be added to a portfolio to really drive better winter peak DSM performance and capacity. And so this is a slide that came right out of the IRP. And what I wanted to do is highlight the fact that this is why I think this is relevant to not only the discussion in Texas, but across the country. And I love the slide that Rachel presented showing that tendency towards winter peak. So what that looks like for Duke Energy Carolinas is that they are adding a lot of large-scale solar generation, as also rooftop solar generation is being added by customers in their service territory. And what that means is that for them, what we call in the utility business, winter net peaks, which is the peak minus distributed generation that the utility has to serve with more conventional generation. Those winter net peaks are becoming consistently higher than summer net peaks in the planning horizon. And that's because of the point that Rachel made about the dual peak nature of winter peaks. They're different than summer peaks, as we can all understand. And if you imagine the nameplate value of solar production in the summertime, you're getting the vast majority of that nameplate value that's coincident with the utility's peak. In the wintertime, particularly that, there is a dual peak in the winter, but the peak that Duke and many other utilities are the most worried about is the winter peak. For Duke, that happens typically between about 6 and 9 a.m. And you can imagine there is not a whole lot of solar production happening at that time. And so if you looked at that base case scenario and then the carbon policy scenario in the 2020 IRP, what it identified was that by 2035, there is a gap of just under 1,200 megawatts between the solar capacity that you have in the summer and the lack of solar capacity of that same generation fleet that you have in the winter. We know that storage will accommodate some of that, but only some of that, particularly in winter events that may be associated with cloud cover for multiple days. And so now, the thing that makes this, I think, even exacerbated for utilities, if we're not being proactive about this, is that DEP and DEC, Duke Energy Carolinas, two systems, also have been focused on DSM that's serving summer peak capacity, because that's where the value's been and avoided cost in the past. And so if you compare summer DSM to winter DSM capacity, there's about 1,000 more megawatts of summer capacity than winter. So we have a large emerging winter resource need gap, and we also have an extreme gap in the capability of what we can do with demand side management programs, winter versus summer. So you can see a problem brewing if we're not going to do something proactively about this. So as I mentioned, the Duke system, one of the things that we really thought was important here was to do a little, we need to follow the loads. What's driving these peaks? And in Duke's system, you can see it's pretty obvious. Look at large industrial, commercial industrial, which is that bottom section of this chart. It is pretty flat. And so while there is some demand response you can get there, that's not the customer segment that's really driving that winter peak. And you can see in the top section, it is really residential loads that are driving that peak and driving it to be, sort of the residential peak starts peaking around 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And one thing that is interesting is that on a typical day, that length of peak time is much shorter than what Duke's summer peaks look like. However, Rachel and Allison pointed this out. That doesn't necessarily hold true in all kind of extreme climate events. The other thing is, it is a lot harder to forecast the exact performance of residential heating when we have a lot of heat pumps with supplemental heat strips, and it's unclear exactly when those are coming on. And so I think more research needs to be done around exactly what does electric heating look like, and the prevalence of heat strips in a market can really change your peak on those very extreme winter days. Oops, I went a little too far. And so I'm going to I'm going to condense a lot of findings into kind of one slide that gives some key takeaways. And I think also some guidance in terms of what could other states be learning from what Duke's done. I think it's really nice that Duke's been proactive about this, and I commend them for being proactive and working with stakeholders on how to address this with a new DSM portfolio that would be more winter focused. And so again, what we found is, why is winter peak suddenly an issue? It's because of their move towards intermittent renewables in their goal to get to 100% clean energy. And in my company, that's the clients that we're seeking out are actually utilities that are seeking to go to 100% clean, because it does bring up really interesting issues associated with how are you going to make sure your DSM programs are, as I say, rowing in the right direction and helping you to meet those needs, and figuring out how that might need to change over time with what programs that you offer. And again, one of the things we noticed is they are different. Winter peaks are different than summer peaks. They are typically shorter in terms of daily duration with Duke. And we like that because it gives more capability for things like load shifting and demand response to have value. But we also have to be careful that they are harder to predict due to electric resistance heating, and also those kind of longer, more extreme winter peaks that we know are out there. And however, one of the things that we certainly found was that in Duke's territory, because of the fact that their programs have been focused, they have a really broad set of programs, but they've been focused on summer. And so significant winter peak savings potential is available. Over the planning horizon, we found about 1,300 megawatts of winter peak capacity from demand side resources. We are big believers that as Duke builds this, and as other utilities think about building up their winter peak savings potential, leverage the existing summer peak programs, the trade allies, the delivery channels you have, the platforms you have. Great example is with BYOT, we're leveraging, for smart thermostat demand response, we're leveraging Duke's summer platform to add winter peak demand response. And so that's going to help your programs get off the ground quicker. They're going to be more cost effective that way, and they're going to help your trade allies come along with you. So I think it's a really good finding that we had that seems kind of obvious, but it's not always, right, in program design. We're going to need to start building capacity now to address those changing resource needs. This isn't a resource we build overnight. So that's the other thing, that we need to double down on our pace of growing this resource as we electrify and as we get to 100% carbon free, or else we're going to find ourselves having significant reliability challenges. For Duke, we found that, again, follow the load that's driving it. Focus on all electric homes for Duke. Those 53% of those we believe are all electric resistance. And so we think that you are helping out your most vulnerable customers who have the highest amount of savings that they can grab for moving to, to a more efficient electric heating source like a heat pump. And it gives the ability to really, meet the load where it's happening. We also found that, about 1/5 of homes have Wi-Fi thermostats right now. Very few have water heating controls. So more of these connected technologies coming into the mix is really going to help in the future. And one of the things you see that we kind of put here on the right as a sidebar is like lean in with customers on the technologies they're already adopting and make sure you're thinking about their use cases and you're developing programs and rates that help get the right load shape that you're trying to achieve. And so finally, the solutions that we developed included both innovative rates like time of use rates, critical peak pricing, which is really focused on those peak days, or peak time rebates, which is more the carrot than the stick approach to those peak days, and even subscription rates where we could co-invest with customers on some of DER technologies in exchange for shared management of those technologies and a reduced rate. That's more of a flat rate. And then within that, we think that we can take programs and design them to work in conjunction with those rates. And those are things like a lot of the same things that Rachel mentioned, right? Demand response through smart thermostats, water heater controls to handle that water heating load and try to shift it off peak. Winterizing homes, both from an envelope perspective and from an HVAC tune-up, maintenance, and replacement perspective. And then really embracing some of those new technologies that we know are going to help. They're not a huge load today, but what can we do with batteries, both with residential and commercial? How do we help with managed EVs, particularly workplace charging that's probably coincident with morning winter peaks? And then finally, there is some load we think from CNI that can be convenient and reliable with automated demand response, where we install enabling technologies, connect them to a program where it's an automated dispatch, and it makes it easier for customers and less costly to implement. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Rachel and we'll kind of get the panel started. But I think these are some ideas that I believe are really relevant to Duke and really for the entire electric industry right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. And thanks to all of our panelists for your presentations. I have a few questions that I'd love to ask all of you, but let's start. If folks in the audience who've joined us have questions, feel free to add those into the chat. And then after we have a chance to start with some of the questions we had prepared as a group, we'll dive into those. So yeah. Feel free to add those right into the chat. Yes.
I wonder if you would, if I can mess with the order a little bit, because you are doing and leading an important piece of work at ACEEE that follows on and builds on many of the findings that we've just discussed here, and you're doing it specifically about Texas. So I think it would be really useful for you to describe this new ACEEE study before we go into the Q&A, please.
Sure. Thanks, Allison. And I will say it's in partnership with SPEER and with Allison. We're working on a piece of work to help to characterize what are the set of things that we can do quickly, really in the next 5 years, with energy efficiency and with demand response that are targeted at addressing the reliability challenges that Texas is facing. And in particular, what are those things that we can do cheaply, quickly, and perhaps more effectively than some of the very, very significant and expensive proposed gas solutions that we're seeing proposed in the legislature and elsewhere. May not be the full solution, but there's certainly a role for efficiency and demand response. We're seeing, I think, really increased interest on the demand response side at the Public Utilities Commission of Texas. There's just a common opportunity due today for questions on demand response, but there hasn't been as much conversation about energy efficiency, and we're hoping to make sure that both components of that demand side management picture are part of the conversation. We think they're really important. So thank you, Allison. Looking forward to sharing those results probably in about 6 weeks with folks who are interested.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the alternate framing of the work that Rachel and her team are doing is how much winter and summer peaking capacity, peaking reduction can we buy within 5 years using energy efficiency and demand response alone? What will that cost, and how do the amount and the cost compare to spending $8 billion on new gas plants? Just to put it out there in terms most of the people now in the Texas market will understand. So
Excellent.
thank you. I'm really looking forward to this. And this is also achievable. This isn't about potential imaginary theoretical capacity. This is nuts and bolts programs that have worked in Texas and elsewhere. So super excited to see that, and really grateful to Energy Foundation and the Mitchell Foundation for funding this important work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for bringing that up, and excited to share those results with. I think this is the group of folks who are probably most interested in that topic. But maybe just putting back to the panel, one of the things we're exploring in this piece of work are some of the most promising measures or options for for really supporting energy efficiency and demand response in a way that's targeted at reliability in particular. So I'm curious, what do you guys see? Maybe if each of you could share, what do you see as the one or two top actions you would take in buildings, be it a measure or a type of program that you see as a real priority for Texas to focus on? What are your top one or two recommendations there? Anyone can jump in.
I want Sneha to go first and then Tom, because they're the buildings experts rather than I.
All right, Allison will sweep it up. Sneha, do you want to start us?
Oh, sure. Thank you. I'm really excited to see the ACEEE work as well as that comes out. I think one thing that comes to mind is making it easier for people to access all the different streams of funding and programs that exist, especially for weatherization, and making sure that especially low-income customers, that everybody has quick access to be able to make those changes in the near future. And I think that another aspect would be the demand, focusing on grid integrated buildings and ways that simple changes can help move demand to off-peak times and help improve kind of people's energy bills as well as reliability at a larger scale.
Awesome, thank you. So weatherization, and I'm hearing grid interactive buildings, which is a good answer because you kind of catch a lot with that. Thank you. Tom, I'll turn over to you.
It's not going to be too different, but I think there's two sides to it, right? Let's think about resiliency at the building level, and that has to be from thermal envelope. It's not coming from products and devices that may not be able to work if the power's out, right? So it's thermal envelope. And so we need to make smart investments in thermal envelopes, and we need to start with the housing stock that's most at risk. And I love the slide that you had, Sneha, about, time till a building becomes uninhabitable. Like, we need to have that more in our planning focus, right? Of like, where is that housing stock in each territory? And let's go do something about it, because that is the only way we're going to improve resiliency at the community and building level. And then I think we need to improve reliability at the grid level, and that is with enabling technologies that we're installing in homes that have a good thermal envelope to begin with, right? If I do demand response in a home that has a really poor thermal envelope, it's not very fun for the participant. What we find is that, in Arizona, we have the highest percentage of Energy Star new construction in the market. And we have over 50,000 homes now connected in our demand response program. And we find that most of them don't know when events happen. And it's because the thermal envelope it performs well. And so we need to pair the two of those together for both resiliency and reliability, and the ability for customers to benefit from sharing that capacity in a way that they don't even notice. So it's enabling technologies combined with just basic energy efficiency, thermal envelope stuff.
Absolutely, and thank you for making that distinction between resilience and reliability, and also between the customer perspective versus the grid perspective. I think that's having that lens is really helpful for what you prioritize. Thanks, Tom. Allison.
I have a similar answer. Weatherization and also for as many homes as possible, particularly low income. I'm going to put it like this. The bank robbers rob banks because that's where the money is. the wasted energy most dominant in Texas is in low-income and multifamily homes. We have a vast reserve of uninsulated housing and crappy air conditioners and heaters that are concentrated most in low-income and multifamily housing. And so the ability to get energy back from those customers and also save lives while we're doing it is much more material there than anywhere else. And you know, electric vehicles, those customers are going to figure out how to take care of themselves sooner or later. And all we have to do is figure out how to not let them charge during peak. And we've got half that battle done. That doesn't strike me as today in Texas for the next 5 years, electric vehicles are a luxury DR problem, not a save the grid problem or opportunity. So my vote is, like all three of us, weatherization, 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 but particularly low-income multifamily with heating and air conditioning.
Wonderful. Thanks, Allison. And if only it were easier to say that 3 times fast. So next, I'm just going to pivot to hearing a little bit from each of you about, I'd love to first start with what's an action that you think either a utility or a city or a business in Texas can take now, absent policy changes, to move this work forward? What's something that can be on the plate now? And then I'm going to ask you what policies we need. But let's start with, given the world we live in now, let's say there's not a policy change that happens. What's something that you recommend or something that you see as a promising pathway or path forward?
Rachel, I guess I'll start. I think growing demand response seems to be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of quick ability to grow capacity, right, towards reliability.
Thanks, Tom. Sneha, what about in cities? Any thoughts on what can cities do now?
I think that cities can help coordinate some of their existing programs and funding sources with utilities and federal funding coming in and other ways to make their programs as easy to access as possible, and can also undergo the necessary research to be able to do that in-depth analysis of where the greatest needs are and what the future of the grid and also the future of natural disasters in their area might look like, and also help support communities that would benefit the most.
Awesome, thank you. Allison, thoughts on what can happen right now in Texas? And pick whatever actor you'd like.
Cities, it'll be a long dry spell before our legislature does much to help on this issue. In the meantime, cities could be going very aggressive, following the lead of Austin and San Antonio on high quality building energy efficiency standards and appliance energy efficiency standards, and making sure that the best possible buildings are out there, and doing similar work on energy efficiency initiatives at the city level to upgrade the quality of housing for lower income and multifamily. As ACEEE has demonstrated with the city and state scorecards, there's a whole lot that can be done that you don't have to, and that you can push your utilities to do, that you don't have to wait on a state or a federal entity to lead on.
Thanks, Allison. Wonderful. Well, it's nice to hear that there are things we can do now, but the next question is, what do we need from policy? What are some of the top policy changes that are needed to really kickstart and enable these resources? Allison shared some of them in her presentation from the Never Again report. So I'll maybe start with Sneha and Tom, and then Allison can share any ones that perhaps we've missed.
Yeah, I agree with that. Better funding in general for a lot of these programs will make a big difference, as well as having the capacity to be able to distribute those funds equitably, and also trying to bundle as many things as possible. So healthy home upgrades that are needed to qualify for weatherization, electrification where it's cost effective, and then also a lot of these demand response technologies, and making that all kind of packaged in a way that makes sense. And I think policy changes, especially through more funding or through some of the strategies that Allison discussed, can help make that easier.
Unlocking funding. It's a good one. Tom, what's on your mind for policy changes? What's on your menu?
Probably not surprisingly to you, Rachel, cost effectiveness, right, should not become a barrier to doing the right thing. And I think in too many states it is right now, where you have all the policy advocates, all the stakeholders, all agreeing that we need to move in more of a distributed energy resource future. And sometimes the mechanics of cost effectiveness not showing it because we're not doing the right accounting behind the true benefits and the true costs. And so in Arizona, in the contemplated rules, they're throwing out tests and going to prudency, which is kind of scary in some ways, but also could be the best thing, to get everybody aligned without, we're still going to look at the tests, but we're not going to be bound by any one test. And so I think in the utility world, that has just come up, that has become the roadblock, I feel like, in too many states right now.
Yeah, Tom, I love that example. And I love the move that Arizona is making there towards a prudency review. Let's treat energy efficiency and demand response the same way we treat any other resource we're putting on the grid. Is it prudent? Okay, great, let's do it. Allison, what about you? What are the policy mechanisms you'd want to highlight?
I love Tom's note about changing or throwing out the energy efficiency cost effectiveness tests. They've been broken for a long time. They are not measuring the right benefits, and they are miscalculating and misassigning costs. So I'm a big fan of throwing away cost benefit analyses or cost effectiveness because we don't have time to fix them. And one of the things that's so appealing to me about energy efficiency and demand response is that they have the opportunity to provide extraordinary value very quickly to both electric systems and to individual families and to society as a whole. And they deliver a lot more benefits than any one resource on the supply side or multiple resources on the supply side. So to my mind, that justifies extraordinary action, which actually sadly means giving them the same deference and benefit that you give to supply side resources rather than giving them special treatment. The only thing that's special is that you're finally doing it for supply side, for demand side resources too. The other thing that I think is valuable is looking at how do we traditionally co-ops and munis, which are extraordinarily powerful here in Texas and serve a significant number of customers and across a lot of the West as well. Co-ops and munis pride themselves on doing the right thing by their people, by their customers, and it would be nice to figure out how to unleash more of that power and enthusiasm through and the kind of demand response and energy efficiency leadership that we need coming from these smaller entities with a greater sense of public responsibility. In Texas, Austin Energy and CPS San Antonio have been the leaders across the nation in terms of efficiency and demand response, and it would be nice to see some of their smaller brethren following in those footsteps.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good policy menu. We've got a good to-do list for the group. So I actually want to turn it to the full group of participants and ask a question. Panelists can answer if they'd like, but I want to open it up to everyone and ask a question, given what we've heard about some of the policy mechanisms. What are some of the next steps that we can take that you or in different individuals, depending on where you live in the ecosystem, can take to move the needle forward for efficiency and demand response? What's something that you can do or want to do? I'll flag, and I think I mentioned this earlier, there's currently a market redesign docket open at the PUC of Texas, and I know SPEER is involved and Allison's involved, and that's clearly an opportunity to make the case for energy efficiency. So I'll flag that as one place where I know some of the folks in the room are getting involved in policy. I'm curious, are there other ways that you're thinking about moving the needle on this in your work? Feel free to jump in the chat or just open up the mic. We can be casual about it.
I think for SPEER, we're trying to work with manufacturers and homeowners too for more efficient HVAC systems, heat pumps. Obviously, we talked about it earlier, how they're just such an energy suck, especially during these peak hours of extreme weather, hot or cold. So we're kind of going, straight to the manufacturers and suppliers, and then also letting folks know that whenever, your AC or heat breaks, that there are other options. You don't have to replace it with what you've always had, just because that's what you're used to, or that's all that you know. So educating that there's more options on that.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I was surprised by the statistic from Sneha that I think you said 62% of households have electric resistance or something along those lines, something very large. So there's clearly a big opportunity to replace that with efficient heat pumps and to ramp up more efficient products. That's exciting. So great. So the manufacturer side is a real opportunity. Other places where folks are thinking about how they can move the needle in Texas. Feel free to brainstorm on that or jump in right in the chat. I'll holler out any good ones that I hear. But yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity for different folks depending on where you are in the community. If you're a utility, if you're a builder, if you're in city government, there's a lot of opportunity. I know it can be a challenging environment. There's definitely some good stuff. Tom.
Yeah, Rachel, I'll add one in, which is I participated in a great workshop a couple of years ago around rapid decarbonization through programs. And one of the things that I see is the need for utilities to be more involved with cities in terms of their climate action plans. As you see more utilities that are doing things that help cities, it feels like there's a disconnect. And what I find is a lot of climate action plans have a lot of good material in them, but they don't actually get executed because there's no funding. And so how can utilities help to connect the programs they have with those cities to make sure that they're thinking about them from a climate action planning perspective? And I think there's a lot there that we could mine.
I want to
That's a great idea. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
back on that. No, same thing. We've kind of been discussing internally. Texas seems to be lagging in communications about programs to customers or even to local governments. And so, how can they inform customers about efficiency programs that exist, what their options are, open up the door to communication with local governments. And maybe a good question is to see what have other states done in terms of increasing these programs that maybe Texas can follow. But I will say there's definitely a very large disconnect between utilities and customers and local governments, which should all be very closely related.
Yeah, Liz, it's a great point. And actually, since Tom is on the line and he was talking about Duke Energy earlier, it reminds me of some work that utility did with the community in Asheville on the western side of North Carolina. And Duke Energy Progress had gotten a lot of pushback from local residents about a proposed new gas plant. And so the community got together with the utility and a large group of folks to really think through, was there a way for us to avoid that? They didn't want that in their community. And the solution, it actually is a winter peaking example, but from a few years ago, was to really think about what is it that energy efficiency and demand side management and demand response can do to address that. They were eventually able to avoid that. And to your point, Liz, I think a lot of what unlocked that was the community of Asheville playing a really important role in helping to promote the programs that Duke actually already had, but maybe wasn't necessarily targeting at those winter peaks. And so that was a great example and perhaps an illustration of what pressure communities might be able to put on their utilities to make some changes.
I also think there's some good examples from CCAs in California because they have the communities on their boards. And so we've helped Monterey Bay, which I forget what their name is now, but could help with connecting any of that.
Thanks, Tom.
Additionally, going in a different direction, one of the things we talk a lot about using cities as the vehicle for the governmental vehicle, but counties are underappreciated and under recognized as actors. And in Texas in particular, counties come to mind because one of the, Texas has more, the term is not pre-built housing I was going to say, you know, mobile homes, but that's no longer the term of art. Building codes generally apply to stick-built new housing. But if you are lower income, you're doing a lot more manufactured home purchase. And most of those are outside city limits. And so it would be nice to figure out how to get counties to be a lot more aggressive about improving the minimum quality of acceptable manufactured housing and seeing what could be done as an equity and health improvement issue to get rid of some of the worst housing, manufactured housing out there and upgrade it. Because as you know, poor housing and poor health harms the entire community and all of the taxpayers. It's not just about they're poor, they're in crappy housing, too bad for them. It hurts all of us in terms of the quality of our community and our economy and our taxes. Yeah. So it would be nice to mobilize counties to be more active on the topic of manufactured housing and its efficiency and well-being contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, great thought. And I'll just flag, it makes me think about, you know, at the federal level right now, DOE has promulgated a draft rule on manufactured housing standards. Actually, for the first time, it's been required to do it forever, hasn't really happened. But that could be really strengthened. And so there's an important role for those cities, for those local governments, for those utilities who are willing to step out and say something. There's an important role in pushing and helping to move the federal standard up, even if state action might be taking a little bit longer. Right now, there is a bit of a federal policy window opportunity, and that could also redound to the benefit of folks in Texas. So that's something as a lever to consider as well.
The other thing I'd like to add, and in particular, I don't know if there's anyone from AEP Texas in this audience, but Tom talked about using energy, and you did, about using energy efficiency and demand response on a community basis. I refer to that as geo-targeting, because it's something that we did at PG&E starting 30, 40 years ago. And the point is, we could be using energy efficiency and demand response very strategically to address grid weaknesses like voltage support and transmission constraints in hint, lower Rio Grande Valley, possibly more aggressively and effectively than we can do waiting until we can figure out how to build more transmission down there to remove that constraint. So that's one more opportunity that utilities could be doing and regulators could be much more aggressive about.
Thanks, Allison. And thanks again to you and Tom and Sneha for joining us today. I think we all learned a lot about the opportunity right now. I think this is a hot topic, a cold topic, depending on the weather. It is certainly an active topic, and really appreciate everyone sharing their perspective. Kelly, I'll turn it back to you if there's any closing matter. And thanks again to everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, no, I would just like to reiterate, thank you to all of our panelists today. We really appreciate you taking the time out to talk about all these incredibly important and very timely topics. So we appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for